Book 5, Chapter 2 of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 5, Chapter 2. "I have the pleasure of addressing Count Bezúkhov, if I am not mistaken," said the stranger in a deliberate and loud voice. Pierre looked silently and inquiringly at him over his spectacles. "I have heard of you, my dear sir," continued the stranger, "and of your misfortune." He seemed to emphasize the last word, as if to say, "Yes, misfortune. Call it what you please. I know that what happened to you in Moscow was a misfortune." "I regret it very much, my dear sir." Pierre flushed, and, hurriedly putting his legs down from the bed, bent forward toward the old man with a forced and timid smile. "I have not referred to this out of curiosity, my dear sir, but for greater reasons." He paused, his gaze still on Pierre, and moved aside on the sofa by way of inviting the other to take a seat beside him. Pierre felt reluctant to enter into conversation with this old man, but, submitting to him involuntarily, came up and sat down beside him. "You are unhappy, my dear sir," the stranger continued. "You are young, and I am old. I should like to help you as far as lies in my power." "Oh, yes," said Pierre with a forced smile. "I am very grateful to you. Where are you traveling from?" The stranger's face was not genial, it was even cold and severe, but in spite of this, both the face and words of his new acquaintance were irresistibly attractive to Pierre. "But if for any reason you don't feel inclined to talk to me," said the old man, "say so, my dear sir." And he suddenly smiled, in an unexpected and tenderly paternal way. "Oh no, not at all. On the contrary, I am very glad to make your acquaintance," said Pierre. And again, glancing at the stranger's hands, he looked more closely at the ring with its skull, a Masonic sign. "Allow me to ask," he said, "are you a Mason?" "Yes, I belong to the Brotherhood of the Freemasons," said the stranger, looking deeper and deeper into Pierre's eyes. "And in their name and my own I hold out a brotherly hand to you." "I am afraid," said Pierre, smiling, and wavering between the confidence the personality of the Freemason inspired in him and his own habit of ridiculing the Masonic beliefs, "I am afraid I am very far from understanding—how am I to put it? I am afraid my way of looking at the world is so opposed to yours that we shall not understand one another." "I know your outlook," said the Mason, "and the view of life you mention, which you think is the result of your own mental efforts, is the one held by the majority of people, and is the invariable fruit of pride, indolence, and ignorance. Forgive me, my dear sir, but if I had not known it, I should not have addressed you. Your view of life is a regrettable delusion." "Just as I may suppose you to be deluded," said Pierre with a faint smile. "I should never dare to say that I know the truth," said the Mason, whose words struck Pierre more and more by their precision and firmness. "No one can attain to truth by himself. Only by laying stone on stone, with the cooperation of all, by the millions of generations from our forefather Adam to our own times, is that temple reared which is to be a worthy dwelling-place of the great God," he added, and closed his eyes. "I ought to tell you that I do not believe in God," said Pierre, regretfully and with an effort, feeling it essential to speak the whole truth. The Mason looked intently at Pierre, and smiled as a rich man with millions in hand might smile at a poor fellow who told him that he, poor man, had not the 5 roubles that would make him happy. "Yes, you do not know him, my dear sir," said the Mason. "You cannot know him. You do not know him, and that is why you are unhappy." "Yes, yes, I am unhappy," assented Pierre. "But what am I to do?" "You know him not, my dear sir, and so you are very unhappy. You do not know him, but he is here, he is in me, he is in my words, he is in thee, and even in those blasphemous words thou hast just uttered," pronounced the Mason in a stern and tremulous voice. He paused and sighed, evidently trying to calm himself. "If he were not," he said quietly, "you and I would not be speaking of him, my dear sir. Of whom are we speaking? Whom hast thou denied?" he suddenly asked with exulting austerity and authority in his voice. "Who invented him, if he did not exist? Whence came thy conception of the existence of such an incomprehensible being? Didst thou, and why did the whole world, conceive the idea of the existence of such an incomprehensible being, a being all-powerful, eternal, and infinite in all his attributes?" He stopped and remained silent for a long time. Pierre could not and did not wish to break this silence. "He exists, but to understand him is hard," the Mason began again, looking not at Pierre but straight before him, and turning the leaves of his book with his old hands, which from excitement he could not keep still. "If it were a man whose existence thou didst doubt, I could bring him to thee, could take him by the hand and show him to thee. But how can I, an insignificant mortal, show his omnipotence, his infinity, and all his mercy to one who is blind, or who shuts his eyes that he may not see or understand him, and may not see or understand his own vileness and sinfulness?" He paused again. "Who art thou? Thou dreamest that thou art wise because thou couldst utter those blasphemous words," he went on with a sombre and scornful smile. "And thou art more foolish and unreasonable than a little child, who, playing with the parts of a skilfully made watch, dares to say that, as he does not understand its use, he does not believe in the master who made it. To know him is hard. For ages, from our forefather Adam to our own day, we labor to attain that knowledge and are still infinitely far from our aim. But in our lack of understanding, we see only our weakness and his greatness." Pierre listened with a swelling heart, gazing into the Mason's face with shining eyes, not interrupting or questioning him, but believing with his whole soul what the stranger said. Whether he accepted the wise reasoning contained in the Mason's words, or believed as a child believes in the speaker's tone of conviction and earnestness, or the tremor of the speaker's voice, which sometimes almost broke, or those brilliant aged eyes grown old in this conviction, or the calm firmness and certainty of his vocation, which radiated from his whole being and which struck Pierre especially by contrast with his own dejection and hopelessness, at any rate, Pierre longed with his whole soul to believe, and he did believe, and felt a joyful sense of comfort, regeneration, and return to life. "He is not to be apprehended by reason, but by life," said the Mason. "I do not understand," said Pierre, feeling with dismay doubts reawakening. He was afraid of any want of clearness, any weakness in the Mason's arguments. He dreaded not to be able to believe in him. "I don't understand," he said, "how it is that the mind of man cannot attain the knowledge of which you speak." The Mason smiled with his gentle fatherly smile. "The highest wisdom and truth are like the purest liquid we may wish to imbibe," he said. "Can I receive that pure liquid into an impure vessel and judge of its purity? Only by the inner purification of myself can I retain in some degree of purity the liquid I receive." "Yes, yes, that is so," said Pierre joyfully. "The highest wisdom is not founded on reason alone, not on those worldly sciences of physics, history, chemistry, and the like, into which intellectual knowledge is divided. The highest wisdom is one. The highest wisdom is but one science, the science of the whole, the science explaining the whole creation and man's place in it. To receive that science, it is necessary to purify and renew one's inner self, and so, before one can know, it is necessary to believe and to perfect one's self. And to attain this end, we have the light called conscience that God has implanted in our souls. Yes, yes, assented Pierre. Look then at thy inner self with the eyes of the spirit, and ask thyself whether thou art content with thyself. What hast thou attained relying on reason only? What art thou? You are young, you are rich, you are clever, you are well educated. And what have you done with all these good gifts? Are you content with yourself and with your life? No, I hate my life, Pierre muttered, wincing. Thou hatest it. Then change it, purify thyself, and as thou art purified, thou wilt gain wisdom. Look at your life, my dear sir. How have you spent it? In riotous orgies and debauchery, receiving everything from society and giving nothing in return. You have become the possessor of wealth. How have you used it? What have you done for your neighbor? Have you ever thought of your tens of thousands of slaves? Have you helped them physically and morally? No. You have profited by their toil to lead a profligate life. That is what you have done. Have you chosen a post in which you might be of service to your neighbor? No. You have spent your life in idleness. Then you married, my dear sir, took on yourself responsibility for the guidance of a young woman. And what have you done? You have not helped her to find the way of truth, my dear sir, but have thrust her into an abyss of deceit and misery. A man offended you, and you shot him, and you say you do not know God and hate your life. There is nothing strange in that, my dear sir. After these words, the mason, as if tired by his long discourse, again leaned his arms on the back of the sofa and closed his eyes. Pierre looked at that aged, stern, motionless, almost lifeless face, and moved his lips without uttering a sound. He wished to say, "Yes, a vile, idle, vicious life," but dared not break the silence. The mason cleared his throat huskily, as old men do, and called his servant. "How about the horses?" he asked, without looking at Pierre. "The exchange horses have just come," answered the servant. "Will you not rest here?" "No, tell them to harness." Can he really be going away, leaving me alone without having told me all, and without promising to help me? Thought Pierre, rising with downcast head. And he began to pace the room, glancing occasionally at the mason. Yes, I never thought of it, but I have led a contemptible and profligate life, though I did not like it and did not want to, thought Pierre. But this man knows the truth, and if he wished to, could disclose it to me. Pierre wished to say this to the mason, but did not dare to. The traveler, having packed his things with his practiced hands, began fastening his coat. When he had finished, he turned to Bezúkhov, and said, in a tone of indifferent politeness, "Where are you going to now, my dear sir?" "I am going to Petersburg," answered Pierre, in a childlike, hesitating voice. "I thank you. I agree with all you have said, but do not suppose me to be so bad. With my whole soul I wish to be what you would have me be, but I have never had help from anyone. But it is I, above all, who am to blame for everything. Help me, teach me, and perhaps I may." Pierre could not go on. He gulped and turned away. The mason remained silent for a long time, evidently considering. "Help comes from God alone," he said. "But such measure of help as our order can bestow, it will render you, my dear sir. You are going to Petersburg. Hand this to Count Wilarski." He took out his notebook and wrote a few words on a large sheet of paper folded in four. "Allow me to give you a piece of advice. When you reach the capital, first of all, devote some time to solitude and self-examination, and do not resume your former way of life. And now I wish you a good journey, my dear sir," he added, seeing that his servant had entered, "and success." The traveler was Joseph Alexeyev Bazdeyev, as Pierre saw from the postmaster's book. Bazdeyev had been one of the best-known Freemasons and Martinists, even in Novikov's time. For a long while after he had gone, Pierre did not go to bed or order horses, but paced up and down the room, pondering over his vicious past, and with a rapturous sense of beginning anew, pictured to himself the blissful, irreproachable, virtuous future that seemed to him so easy. It seemed to him that he had been vicious only because he had somehow forgotten how good it is to be virtuous. Not a trace of his former doubts remained in his soul. He firmly believed in the possibility of the brotherhood of men, united in the aim of supporting one another in the path of virtue, and that is how Freemasonry presented itself to him. End of Book 5, Chapter 2. Book 5, Chapter 3 of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 5, Chapter 3. On reaching Petersburg, Pierre did not let anyone know of his arrival. He went nowhere and spent whole days in reading Thomas A. Kempis, whose book had been sent him by someone unknown. One thing he continually realized as he read that book: the joy, hitherto unknown to him, of believing in the possibility of attaining perfection, and in the possibility of active brotherly love among men, which Joseph Alexeyev had revealed to him. A week after his arrival, the young Polish Count Wilarski, whom Pierre had known slightly in Petersburg society, came into his room one evening in the official and ceremonious manner in which Dólokhov's second had called on him, and, having closed the door behind him and satisfied himself that there was nobody else in the room, addressed Pierre. "I have come to you with a message and an offer, Count," he said without sitting down. "A person of very high standing in our brotherhood has made application for you to be received into our order before the usual term, and has proposed to me to be your sponsor. I consider it a sacred duty to fulfill that person's wishes. Do you wish to enter the Brotherhood of Freemasons under my sponsorship?" The cold, austere tone of this man, whom he had almost always before met at balls, amiably smiling in the society of the most brilliant women, surprised Pierre. "Yes, I do wish it," said he. Wilarski bowed his head. "One more question, Count," he said, "which I beg you to answer in all sincerity. Not as a future Mason, but as an honest man. Have you renounced your former convictions? Do you believe in God?" Pierre considered. Yes, I believe in God," he said. "In that case," began Wilarski, but Pierre interrupted him. "Yes, I do believe in God," he repeated. "In that case we can go," said Wilarski. "My carriage is at your service." Wilarski was silent throughout the drive. To Pierre's inquiries as to what he must do and how he should answer, Wilarski only replied that brothers more worthy than he would test him, and that Pierre had only to tell the truth. Having entered the courtyard of a large house where the lodge had its headquarters, and having ascended a dark staircase, they entered a small, well-lit anteroom where they took off their cloaks without the aid of a servant. From there they passed into another room. A man in strange attire appeared at the door. Wilarski, stepping toward him, said something to him in French in an undertone, and then went up to a small wardrobe in which Pierre noticed garments such as he had never seen before. Having taken a kerchief from the cupboard, Wilarski bound Pierre's eyes with it and tied it in a knot behind, catching some hairs painfully in the knot. Then he drew his face down, kissed him, and taking him by the hand, led him forward. The hairs tied in the knot hurt Pierre, and there were lines of pain on his face and a shamefaced smile. His huge figure, with arms hanging down and with a puckered though smiling face, moved after Wilarski with uncertain, timid steps. Having led him about 10 paces, Wilarski stopped. "Whatever happens to you," he said, "you must bear it all manfully if you have firmly resolved to join our brotherhood." Pierre nodded affirmatively. "When you hear a knock at the door, you will uncover your eyes," added Willarski. "I wish you courage and success." And pressing Pierre's hand, he went out. Left alone, Pierre went on smiling in the same way. Once or twice he shrugged his shoulders and raised his hand to the kerchief, as if wishing to take it off, but let it drop again. The 5 minutes spent with his eyes bandaged seemed to him an hour. His arms felt numb, his legs almost gave way. It seemed to him that he was tired out. He experienced a variety of most complex sensations. He felt afraid of what would happen to him, and still more afraid of showing his fear. He felt curious to know what was going to happen, and what would be revealed to him. But most of all, he felt joyful that the moment had come when he would at last start on that path of regeneration and on the actively virtuous life of which he had been dreaming since he met Joseph Alexeyevitch. Loud knocks were heard at the door. Pierre took the bandage off his eyes and glanced around him. The room was in black darkness. Only a small lamp was burning inside something white. Pierre went nearer and saw that the lamp stood on a black table, on which lay an open book. The book was the Gospel, and the white thing with the lamp inside was a human skull with its cavities and teeth. After reading the first words of the Gospel, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God," Pierre went round the table and saw a large open box filled with something. It was a coffin with bones inside. He was not at all surprised by what he saw. Hoping to enter on an entirely new life quite unlike the old one, he expected everything to be unusual, even more unusual than what he was seeing. A skull, a coffin, the Gospel. It seemed to him that he had expected all this and even more. Trying to stimulate his emotions, he looked around. "God, death, love, the brotherhood of man," he kept saying to himself, associating these words with vague yet joyful ideas. The door opened and someone came in. By the dim light, to which Pierre had already become accustomed, he saw a rather short man. Having evidently come from the light into the darkness, the man paused, then moved with cautious steps toward the table and placed on it his small leather-gloved hands. This short man had on a white leather apron, which covered his chest and part of his legs. He had on a kind of necklace, above which rose a high white ruffle, outlining his rather long face, which was lit up from below. "For what have you come hither?" asked the newcomer, turning in Pierre's direction at a slight rustle made by the latter. "Why have you, who do not believe in the truth of the light and who have not seen the light, come here? What do you seek from us? Wisdom, virtue, enlightenment?" At the moment the door opened and the stranger came in, Pierre felt a sense of awe and veneration such as he had experienced in his boyhood at confession. He felt himself in the presence of one socially a complete stranger, yet nearer to him through the brotherhood of man. With bated breath and beating heart he moved toward the Retter, by which name the brother who prepared a seeker for entrance into the brotherhood was known. Drawing nearer, he recognized in the Retter a man he knew, Smolyaninoff, and it mortified him to think that the newcomer was an acquaintance. He wished him simply a brother and a virtuous instructor. For a long time he could not utter a word, so that the Retter had to repeat his question. "Yes, I desire regeneration," Pierre uttered with difficulty. "Very well," said Smolyaninoff, and went on at once. "Have you any idea of the means by which our holy order will help you to reach your aim?" he said quietly and quickly. "I hope for guidance, help, in regeneration," said Pierre with a trembling voice and some difficulty in utterance due to his excitement and to being unaccustomed to speak of abstract matters in Russian. "What is your conception of Freemasonry?" "I imagine that Freemasonry is the fraternity and equality of men who have virtuous aims," said Pierre, feeling ashamed of the inadequacy of his words for the solemnity of the moment, as he spoke. "I imagine—" "Good," said the Retter quickly, apparently satisfied with this answer. "Have you sought for means of attaining your aim in religion?" "No, I considered it erroneous, and did not follow it," said Pierre, so softly that the reader did not hear him, and asked him what he was saying. "I have been an atheist," answered Pierre. "You are seeking for truth in order to follow its laws in your life. Therefore, you seek wisdom and virtue. Is that not so?" said the reader after a moment's pause. "Yes, yes," assented Pierre. The reader cleared his throat, crossed his gloved hands on his breast, and began to speak. "Now I must disclose to you the chief aim of our order," he said, "and if this aim coincides with yours, you may enter our brotherhood with profit. The first and chief object of our order, the foundation on which it rests and which no human power can destroy, is the preservation and handing on to posterity of a certain important mystery, which has come down to us from the remotest ages, even from the first man, a mystery on which perhaps the fate of mankind depends. But since this mystery is of such a nature that nobody can know or use it unless he be prepared by long and diligent self-purification, not everyone can hope to attain it quickly. Hence we have a secondary aim, that of preparing our members as much as possible to reform their hearts, to purify and enlighten their minds, by means handed on to us by tradition from those who have striven to attain this mystery, and thereby to render them capable of receiving it. By purifying and regenerating our members, we try, thirdly, to improve the whole human race, offering it in our members an example of piety and virtue, and thereby try with all our might to combat the evil which sways the world. Think this over, and I will come to you again." "To combat the evil which sways the world," Pierre repeated, and a mental image of his future activity in this direction rose in his mind. He imagined men such as he had himself been a fortnight ago, and he addressed an edifying exhortation to them. He imagined to himself vicious and unfortunate people whom he would assist by word and deed, imagined oppressors whose victims he would rescue. Of the three objects mentioned by the reader, this last, that of improving mankind, especially appealed to Pierre. The important mystery mentioned by the reader, though it aroused his curiosity, did not seem to him essential, and the second aim, that of purifying and regenerating himself, did not much interest him because at that moment he felt with delight that he was already perfectly cured of his former faults, and was ready for all that was good. Half an hour later, the reader returned to inform the seeker of the 7 virtues, corresponding to the 7 steps of Solomon's Temple, which every Freemason should cultivate in himself. These virtues were: 1. Discretion, the keeping of the secrets of the order. 2. Obedience, to those of higher ranks in the order. 3. Morality. 4. Love of mankind. 5. Courage. 6. Generosity. 7. The love of death. "In the 7th place, try, by frequent thought of death," the reader said, "to bring yourself to regard it, not as a dreaded foe, but as a friend that frees the soul grown weary in the labors of virtue from this distressful life, and leads it to its place of recompense and peace." "Yes, that must be so," thought Pierre, when after these words the reader went away, leaving him to solitary meditation. "It must be so, but I am still so weak that I love my life, the meaning of which is only now gradually opening before me." But 5 of the other virtues which Pierre recalled, counting them on his fingers, he felt already in his soul: courage, generosity, morality, love of mankind, and especially obedience, which did not even seem to him a virtue, but a joy. He now felt so glad to be free from his own lawlessness and to submit his will to those who knew the indubitable truth. He forgot what the 7th virtue was, and could not recall it. The 3rd time the reader came back more quickly, and asked Pierre whether he was still firm in his intention, and determined to submit to all that would be required of him. "I am ready for everything," said Pierre. "I must also inform you," said the reader, "that our order delivers its teaching, not in words only, but also by other means, which may perhaps have a stronger effect on the sincere seeker after wisdom and virtue than mere words. This chamber with what you see therein should already have suggested to your heart, if it is sincere, more than words could do. You will perhaps also see in your further initiation a like method of enlightenment. Our order imitates the ancient societies that explain their teaching by hieroglyphics. A hieroglyph, said the Reader, is an emblem of something not cognizable by the senses, but which possesses qualities resembling those of the symbol. Pierre knew very well what a hieroglyph was, but dared not speak. He listened to the Reader in silence, feeling from all he said that his ordeal was about to begin. "If you are resolved, I must begin your initiation," said the Reader, coming closer to Pierre. "In token of generosity, I ask you to give me all your valuables." "But I have nothing here," replied Pierre, supposing that he was asked to give up all he possessed. "What you have with you: watch, money, rings." Pierre quickly took out his purse and watch, but could not manage for some time to get the wedding ring off his fat finger. When that had been done, the Reader said, "In token of obedience, I ask you to undress." Pierre took off his coat, waistcoat, and left boot according to the Reader's instructions. The mason drew the shirt back from Pierre's left breast, and stooping down, pulled up the left leg of his trousers to above the knee. Pierre hurriedly began taking off his right boot also, and was going to tuck up the other trouser leg to save this stranger the trouble, but the mason told him that was not necessary, and gave him a slipper for his left foot. With a childlike smile of embarrassment, doubt, and self-derision, which appeared on his face against his will, Pierre stood with his arms hanging down and legs apart, before his brother Reader, and awaited his further commands. "And now, in token of candor, I ask you to reveal to me your chief passion," said the latter. "My passion? I have so many," replied Pierre. "That passion which more than all others caused you to waver on the path of virtue," said the mason. Pierre paused, seeking a reply. "Wine? Gluttony? Idleness? Laziness? Irritability? Anger? Women?" He went over his vices in his mind, not knowing to which of them to give the preeminence. "Women," he said in a low, scarcely audible voice. The mason did not move, and for a long time said nothing after this answer. At last he moved up to Pierre, and taking the kerchief that lay on the table, again bound his eyes. "For the last time I say to you, turn all your attention upon yourself. Put a bridle on your senses, and seek blessedness, not in passion, but in your own heart. The source of blessedness is not without us, but within." Pierre had already long been feeling in himself that refreshing source of blessedness which now flooded his heart with glad emotion. End of Book 5, Chapter 3.